I've always kept issues of interest rate at sort of arm's length observation. I've only been a bond repayer since 2019, and before then I kept a very news-like interaction with bonds and interest rates and the repo rate and things like that. Since 2019, being a bond repayer, I've become a little bit more circumspect and a little bit more observant. But those were relatively good times, a period just before a COVID lockdown, not a perfect economy, but gosh, where we are now, chalk and cheese. And over the last while, whenever there is an MPC Monetary Policy Committee meeting, I sit up straight and I notice. It was last week, as Lester Kiewit was making the announcement of the increased rate, 50 basis points interest rate hike. My wife and I, both on the couch. It was mid-afternoon, both at home. I'm watching it on my phone, and he says 50 basis points, and we both sigh, and we look at each other, and we say, we'll see how it goes next month. And many families have been doing that. From working families to middle class families, we've all been feeling the pinch. We know the poor state of our economy can make things challenging for any individual or family, but how does it manifest itself in terms of the impact of our mental health and our relationships within our family? So this Wednesday panel, we ask and we offer this platform for you to talk about the issues of the economy and mental health. Joining me on the line is Jeanne Fraser, who is the Deputy Director of FAMSA Family Life Centre South Africa, joins me now on the line. Jeanne, thanks so much. I hope you are well. I hope your family is doing well, but how is South Africa doing generally when it comes to issues around the economy, load shedding, perpetual crisis, and our mental health?
Hi, what a one mouthful they are. That is such a difficult thing to look at, because I think at the moment things are not going well at all. And our general state of being is to try and avoid things that are difficult to face. But yeah, South Africa is not doing so great, and that is reflected definitely in terms of what we see families and individuals coming for support to Family South Africa, looking for ways to coping strategies, how to improve their quality of life, often just not being sure where to start.
Cassey Chambers is with the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. Understand that the number of phone calls of people reaching out for help has increased substantially just over the last 4, 5, 6 months of this year alone. People's mental health is struggling when South Africa's economy is struggling, Cassey.
Absolutely. You know, we're seeing so many people reaching out on a daily basis, and those calls are increasing every day from people across the country, different age groups, different backgrounds, from people who are really struggling. I mean, our call volumes at the moment are about 2,500 to 3,000 incoming calls per day, and we get hundreds more SMSs, emails, WhatsApp, social media. I think that there's a huge strain that so many individuals, families, parents are really experiencing and feeling very helpless and hopeless. And that's why they're reaching out. And I think we're also very aware that the people that are reaching out, which is great, is good help-seeking behavior. However, there's a lot more on the ground who maybe don't know about SADAG, or are too afraid to reach out, or don't know who to turn to, and are suffering. So there's a lot more people on the ground that maybe aren't reaching out to us, who are also struggling.
Received a message from a listener last week, Cassey, asking when is the next electricity price increase for Eskom customers. It was in April. The city of Cape Town is on the 1st of June. And this listener said that they were actually crowding around at work, exchanging stories of how small incremental increases like 18% city of Cape Town electricity price increase is going to affect them. Is there benefit in small little circles, like an office group unpacking of just how much 18% electricity hike would mean, or how much the extra R1.50 of a loaf of bread, which I've now noticed over the last few months. Does that help or hinder our grappling with our mental health?
I think, it's great that people can talk about this. And I think it's a topic of conversation, right? That everyone is talking about it, whether it be at your family gathering or around the braai or around the coffee station at work. This is our day to day. And every single day feels like something, right? The load shedding stage is changing, another increase. We see the news and perhaps there's another protest. And all of that has a financial knock-on effect. And I think as South Africans, we're constantly recalculating, readjusting, and it's a topic of conversation because it impacts every aspect of our life. I think it's great that we can talk about it, but I don't know if we're finding the kind of solutions, or because so many of us are struggling, are we able to support each other? And this is kind of, how do we have those connected conversations? And I think, interesting, we did a survey a couple of months ago about the impact of load shedding on mental health. And we saw increased levels of anxiety, agitation, road rage. So we think that something as small and something we should get used to around load shedding actually has a day-to-day impact. And that's just from having to navigate, when do I have power? What is the traffic like? Am I going to be late? Can I do that Zoom meeting? All these different things, we're constantly readjusting, constantly recalculating, and it's costing us money. We're looking at a country where we're changing from thriving and just how do we survive?
I don't think I'm doing myself a service by having our neighborhood, my parents' neighborhood, the area of where our office is situated. And I don't know why, but I get 4 notifications for 4 different suburbs on the Eskom's push app about load shedding. And whenever I hear that and see it, that escalates my blood pressure. Moeshfieka Botha, who is a financial educator, that isn't, it can't be healthy, being permanently reminded of a state of crisis.
No, absolutely not. Good morning, Lester. And unfortunately, that's where we find ourselves in. And just taking your personal story into account, there are so many people who entered as first-time home buyers pre-COVID in 2019. And since November 2019, up until now, there have been 11 interest rate hikes. If you had a bond of 2 million rand, 2.5 million rand, you have seen your bond repayment go up by over 6,000 rand per month. Now, that is enough to cause strain, financial strain, but emotional strain as well, because it is highly doubtful that your bond has increased by over 6,000 rand a month. Your other debt, your unsecured debt, your credit card your credit card debt repayment has increased, your personal loan debt repayment has increased, your vehicle debt has increased, your everyday cost of living has increased, and it's highly undoubtful that your income has increased at the rate at which your expenses has. And unless you're in a relationship where money has been a focal point, and unless you come from a background, which very, very few people come from, where you can openly speak about money in times of crisis, to try and connect and to now say, okay, what is happening here? What should we do? It's very, very difficult for you to suddenly change gear and say, okay, let me now be the person who openly speaks to my family about our financial crisis.
Jeanne Fraser, who is the director of FAMSA, Family Life Centre South Africa. Some interesting data coming out of the last few years, Jeanne, in how that marriages, or the registration of marriages in South Africa, have gone down. Divorces have gone up, particularly in the Western Cape. Of course, there are many different combinations and iterations of what a family is. But if we just look at the very, very narrow definition of marriage of two parents and children. I know correlation is not causation, but is there an indication to you that as the economy continues to suffer, less people getting married, and because of a poor economy, more people finding strain within their relationships and their marriages? Jeanne?
That's quite an interesting take on it. And I think there could definitely be a correlation in terms of people deciding to maybe postpone making commitments and starting a family and things like that due to economical reasons. But when you look at the family and individuals within a family, there are several aspects that impact their functioning and their well-being. And this includes their physical health, their psychological well-being, social functioning, intellectual well-being, occupational wellness, and then a lot of other things, as well as the environmental factors, and then their financial well-being. So if you look at the whole person, all of these factors impact each other. And when there's things happening in the broader environment, in the macroeconomy and the which affects, even the smaller communities, there's definitely an impact on the person as well as on the family. And whether you are aware of it or not, you base the decisions that you make by your observations and your perceptions of how, these things are going to impact you. So in terms of the economic situation affecting families, as you were saying, you've got maybe this, you can buy less and less with the money that you have. And the worst impact is on the most vulnerable people in the community, in the society, which are the poorest of the poor. So it definitely has an effect on the family. The stress of maybe not being able to meet the needs of your children, of yourself, of your spouse, can lead to distress, which comes with a lot of risk for neglect and abuse then again as well. So everything is being affected by the economy, and the economy is being affected by the broader political environment and everything going on. And you will see as well, obviously one of the consequences of the deteriorating economy is the maintenance of the environment. There isn't money to perhaps maintain things the way they should be. The environment is deteriorating, which leads to an overall impact on mental health as well. So every aspect of a person is definitely affected by the economy and by the broader environment.
Cassey, I really appreciate this message, Lester. I don't need a psychologist. I need 100,000 Rand to pay off my debt. I appreciate that, Cassey. There are people who say, yes, I'll go speak to someone to help me with my mental health, but my mental health is caused by overburdened by debt and unable to keep up with maybe a lifestyle, or maybe simply just to keep up with making ends meet. I don't need a psychologist. I need 100,000 Rand, says this listener, Cassey.
Absolutely. And I think what's really interesting from that as well, when you've got the constant problems and stresses, talking about it, coming up with an action plan. And I think, when we're also looking at mental health treatment in South Africa, especially families who are having now to make really hard decisions and having hard conversations, it's not even so much as we can go on holiday anymore, and we keep the house. We're losing the car. We are battling to get food on the table. Can I pay for school fees? But also the biggest area that we look at cutting costs is around our health, and especially mental health, where it's seen as such a luxury to go for treatment. And it's so expensive to see a psychologist or to see a psychiatrist. So that's often the first area that people often cut on. And I think it is really hard when we're looking at, we're just needing electricity, we're just needing money to pay off our debts, we're just needing food on the table. We often think that sometimes talking about it isn't going to help. And yes, money would fix our problems, but it's around our coping. It's around that action plan. And this is what we even see at SADAG with people calling us, is they can't afford help, they can't afford treatment. But the impact of this stress and this emotional worry, it affects our sleep, it affects our physical health. We're finding even people getting physically sicker. It's triggering physical illness. And that puts an extra strain on the family. So talking about that snowball effect is very true and very real for a lot of South Africans. I saw a message yesterday where a family has lost an income into the household, has now had to repossess their car. They've just got an eviction notice. I mean, these are real problems and real issues that people are dealing with, and they're needing support and help with an action plan. What do I do? What can I do? And I think when we're looking at that ecosystem, it might not be a psychologist right now, but it might be someone like a financial advisor. It might be speaking to your bank. It might be speaking to a debt counselor. The great thing is looking at different options, is that you don't have to do this alone. And there are different ways of getting help.
And I think this speaks to this message from John, who says, "Morning, not sure what good this conversation did, telling us what I already know. Times are tough. People are suffering. I don't need experts to rub it in." Your response, Cassey?
And how many other South Africans are listening right now and nodding, right? It's kind of this daily reminder of how it really is hard. And sometimes it's very difficult to find if there is light at the end of the tunnel as we're dealing with constant changes every day. And I think, we don't always have the right solution, but about talking about it and letting us know that we're not alone in it is definitely one step in the right direction. We also have to be very careful of this toxic positivity of everything will be better, everything will be fine. It's not. We're having to readjust and see what is going to work for you. And for a lot of people who don't have support, reaching out is one of those steps. Talking about what has worked for other people is incredible. I see a lot of people connecting on Facebook groups, coming up with ideas, sharing what is working. Sometimes when we feel like we're all alone and there's this doom and gloom and heaviness, sometimes connecting can just give us enough energy to get through to the next step. Yeah. So I hear what they're saying, and I fully understand and agree. It's hard.
Moeshfieka, this message: the interest rate hikes have very badly affected my family with massive increases in my bond and car repayments. I'm considering taking my sons out of university because I can't afford the fees. The Reserve Bank doesn't understand what it's doing. There's the macroeconomics at play. There are geopolitics at play. We are but insignificant ants in a battle of giants. We can, of course, play our part when we talk about elections and holding leaders accountable. But when someone feels so small like that, Moeshfieka, the Reserve Bank doesn't understand what it's doing and how it's affecting me, Joe Soap, and that even another 250 Rand interest rate increase on added payment to my bond, it's going to put me underwater. What do you respond, Moeshfieka?
Yeah, just a 250 Rand increase, Lester. You're looking at a bread a day in many households. I also think that while we keep discussing what we already know to be true, we have to start looking at creating platforms which offer solutions and creating platforms which gives consumers access to information which can assist when they are in the situation. So we have to look at getting platforms that say to consumers, before you go into arrears with your debt, have you looked at your credit insurance? Have you looked at what your credit insurance is? Is there something that says, have you been paying a credit insurance that says, if I do lose my job, my credit is insured for 12 months and I don't have to pay this installment? You have to look at what does it say. Can you go and discuss with your creditor, with your bank, the option of increasing your term, decreasing your interest rate? If you have not defaulted and you can show your bank that this is why there has been a decrease in an income into the household. I have been put on short time because I am unemployed, or I've been put on short time because the company that I work for is losing money because of load shedding. Speak to and it's what Cassey was saying. It's about the support system, but it's also to me more about access to information that can help the consumer. And unfortunately, we're also finding that the access to this information is not necessarily coming from the places where it should.
We'll go straight into a voice note, Mario, and I'll have one of our panelists reflect.
So this is Jonathan from the Parent Center. What we've definitely seen in terms of marriages is, I think what you're more and more seeing is marriages were deeply affected. All relationships were deeply affected during COVID. A lot of relationships that were used to compartmentalizing and spending separate time as we went to work and stuff were suddenly forced to spend a lot of time together, which put a lot of strain and widened cracks that already existed in marriages. But what's interesting is what the economy does is it means that people can't necessarily divorce as easily, or they divorce, but they have to cohabitate in the same house because it's just too expensive to move out. And that's one of the interesting repercussions.
I think that's a fascinating perspective. Jeanne, Fraser of FAMSA?
Yes, absolutely. That we are definitely can concur with that. That is a trend we are seeing. It is becoming more and more difficult to leave relationships, and this is especially difficult when there's been strain in a relationship and which led to domestic violence or an abusive kind of, even if it's any type of abuse. It's becoming harder and harder for people to leave such relationships, and with the strain on it, you actually see an increase in those kind of things. And I just want to add what he said, that the Harvard Human Happiness Study showed that the most important thing in your life that determines whether, when you look back on your life to say it was a successful life, is not economics of your financial well-being. It's not any of the things that you gather, but it's the relationships that you foster. So that's why we have distress when our relationships are not going well, and it affects your mental health, and you feel terrible and you don't feel like going on with life. But the truth is, the human brain is amazingly able to find ways to survive and cope with very, very difficult circumstances. So often it is just a matter of, I haven't figured this out yet. We haven't quite figured it out yet. And that is why it's important to have these conversations. This is how we get to figuring it out.
Let's go to another voice note, Mario.
Lester, good morning. Floris hier van Worcester. Lester, yeah. Do you know what? This load shedding is really taking a toll on everyone in South Africa. I think we need a national counseling day. The way things are currently going, it's just dragging us down, draining us emotionally. But what me and my wife are doing, when it's load shedding, we normally catch up on some talking time, talking of things that still need to be done, talking about things that needs to be said, and just do overall planning. So yeah, we're putting our load shedding to good use. So yeah, in a small way, it is kind of favorable for us, because I have a chatterbox for a wife. She normally wants to talk when I want to watch sports or news, so I add her to talk while it's load shedding. Have a good show. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it, Flores. Look, when our load shedding was stage 1, yes, it was a major inconvenience. I looked to the bright side. I saw it as some sort of state-sponsored nap time, eh? Just go nap now. It's far more serious. But let's go to the phone lines. Anna-Marie in Melkbosstrand. How are you doing, Anna-Marie?
I'm fine, thank you. Good morning to you all. I just want people to know there's always hope. I bought my home in the early 90s, and 3 months after I bought my home, and it was only 150,000 rand, and the interest rate wasn't that high. My husband committed suicide 3 months after I bought the house, and as a school teacher, I only had my salary to pay for it, and my daughter was only 2 years old. But we managed to do that. Later in the 90s, interest rate went up to about 28%. And that was a terrible thing to go through. During school holidays and on Saturdays, I worked at a nursery school just to add up to the extra I had to pay. It took me 27 years to pay off on this house of 150,000 rand. And it was worth it. We could never go on holiday, but it didn't matter. I just never wanted to lose my house. And my daughter, I put through medical school and still being a teacher. And you can manage. You just have to cut on things that are not necessary. And my daughter, even although she was only 2 years old, helped me draw up a budget every month, what we could afford and what we could not. And it was worth it. But there's always hope. People should never lose hope and keep their faith. Keep on praying, because God will come through and He blesses people that want to work. Please do not lose hope. And you don't need to be ashamed of having to go through difficult times.
Anna-Marie and Melkbos really appreciate that call. I think it segs into this message that I received here, Moeshfieka. Single mothers are battling. There's little or no support. Everyone says they understand, but there's very little light. Moeshfieka, I'll let you have a stab at that comment.
Yes, Esther. I find that I'm writing more and more articles, speaking to more and more people who are saying to me, you know what, we can't tighten our belts any further. We have drawn up budgets, we are cutting down, and we cannot cut down any further anyway. And I think we also have to acknowledge that that is the reality of the situation for very many people. We also have to make that acknowledgement. We have to acknowledge when somebody is saying, I'm cut to the bone. We cannot say to that person, no, you know what, perhaps you haven't, perhaps you're not. Because a single mother who is working on one income, trying to do everything with these rising costs, with load shedding, it is, and like Cassey and Jeanne was saying, it does take a mental toll, it does take an emotional toll, but realistically, the financial pain is there, and the financial pain needs to be acknowledged, Lester. We need to be able to say to people who are experiencing this, yes, what you're experiencing is real. Again, I'd like to say to people, reach out to people within the industries who could assist. And again, like what the caller from Melkbos was saying, you know what, you've got to be able to look. Saving money is not necessarily these days in taking physical money and putting it into a bank account. Saving money could mean as little as taking shorter showers. It could mean as little as putting a pillow up your chimney to keep the cold out so that you don't spend as much on your gas heater. We've literally got to get back to those basics and see what it is that we can do. But again, I need to ask that we start to acknowledge the actual real financial pain that people are experiencing.
Cassey, I'll have you have the last word about reaching out to services. SADAG, where do people get in touch?
Absolutely. And I think this is where it ties in, is that if we're feeling emotionally overwhelmed, if our mental health is not doing well, it has this impact on every aspect of our life, and it makes it even more difficult to cope with these things like budgets and financial plans. And it's really important that we look after our mental health so that we can gain control to look after the other things that are out of our control. There are so many different free resources available, whether you work looking at your employee assistance programs, which are free benefits within your company that you can access counseling. You can reach out to the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. There's even resources through FAMSA and Lifeline and Counselling Hub in Cape Town.
We'll add on to that the South African Depression and Anxiety Group 0800 70 80 90. It's really, really important number to know. Thank you so much to our panelists on this Wednesday panel.